Gyles Brandreth, Freddy Gray, thank you very much for joining us on Spectator TV.
Great to be with you.
Thank you. Freddie, let's start with your piece. You've written the cover for this week's magazine, War of the Windsors, and of course the news angle here, of course, is today the Harry and Meghan documentary has dropped on Netflix, and I think you've seen a bit of it so far?
Yeah, I know the intelligent thing to say is that you shouldn't watch it because you shouldn't feed the monster and that you have no interest in it whatsoever, but I'm a disgusting human being, so I watched it quite promptly this morning. I also thought if I'm writing about it, I probably do have to watch it. And I will say that I think the other smart thing to say about it already is that it's very boring. And it is, but at the same time, it's unbelievably hilarious.
How so?
Because it's accidental comedy gold. I mean, it starts with Meghan sitting on a bed, I think, with a towel on her head, trying to make herself cry. Sorry, it's very cynical. Or upset, let's say. And then it goes into a sort of long bit about them falling in love, and there's ridiculous sort of piano music to sort of make you to manipulate your emotions. But actually, I think that people watch this because they find it very, very funny. And in fact, it's almost a sort of new genre of comedy.
Very self-aware. You never guessed she was a Hollywood star before this.
No, well, I was thinking about that. She's not a very good actress. That's the real problem. She can't even act herself.
When you say Hollywood star, I have American friends who are telling me that it's not as big a story over there as we may be playing it.
Yes.
That in fact, of course they're well known there, but they're not front page, they're not first division stars. They're sort of page 3 or page 5 as a rule. So we mustn't overdo it. Because I'm a biographer of the Queen, I rather like the Queen. I like to think I can take the long view. And I've been thinking about this and actually reflecting what we're seeing, the television thing, is about Harry and Meghan. It's not actually about really the royal family. It's about a family, but it's not about the institution of monarchy at all. And I think he must be aware of that because, of course, his book is called Spare. It's in some ways a clever title, an heir and a spare, but he is the spare, and that may be part of why he's got problems. Meghan may be why he's got problems. Anyway, he's got sadness in his life and he's sharing it with us. But from the Queen's point of view, the great thing about being the Queen is she'd seen it all before. And, the 1930s, when she was a young girl, there was Edward VIII abdicating to marry his twice divorced American. Then the 1950s, there was all the scandal about Princess Margaret and wanting to marry an older man who also was a married man. So it's kind of roller coaster. And I think the Queen would have thought, this too will pass, and moved on and thought, well, what's on the other side? Because, during her illness, I was told by the master of the household at Windsor Castle, he said she's been watching Line of Duty. And my role now is as the explainer, which is really very funny because it's quite complicated. But she was trying to follow it.
No, I was going to say David Tang, the late David Tang, once told me that someone asked the Queen when The Crown had just come out if she was watching that, and she said, "Well, I was there. That was her life." So she wasn't so much a fan of that. Freddie, one of the key sort of arguments and fault lines about the documentary has been about how William and Kate are portrayed in this, and just wondered if you think that perhaps is Kate Middleton perhaps the main target for the Sussexes in all of this?
That's what people are saying. I've only watched an hour of it. I think there's 3 hours out now. Certainly there's a sort of attempt to say that there's all this sort of self-pitying stuff about the gilded cage. They're all living in this gilded cage, and it's actually very difficult to be a royal, and all that stuff, which is a little bit sickening, I think, after a certain point. Some people are born into grinding poverty, and I think that they've obviously, they're trying to suggest that Kate, that they sort of say, women marrying into this institution. Harry says, I'm worried about women marrying into this institution. This was actually in the trailer. And then there's a sort of shot of Kate looking unhappy. So they're obviously trying to suggest that. But it didn't feel like it's going to go after her in quite the way that some people seem to be concerned about.
Well, can I make almost a serious point, really, in that is this introspection a good thing? I first got into writing about the Queen through knowing the Duke of Edinburgh because I was the chairman of one of his pet charities. And he was very keen on, don't talk about yourself. People aren't interested. They really aren't interested. And I know he told each of his children, I don't know if he said it to his grandchildren. But as a rule, don't talk about yourself. Not because it's a risk, and it is a risk. If you answer one question to a journalist, they'll always ask another. It never ends. But more, actually, in life, don't think about yourself. Ask the other person what they're doing. People aren't interested in you. You should be interested in them. And his philosophy was look up, look out, don't think about yourself, don't talk about yourself, get on with the job.
I think it's fair to say that's a lesson that Harry and Meghan have not learned.
Well, the point is, I think they will be the unhappier because of it. Because the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh lived very long lives. He lived to 99, she lived to 96. And the Queen was a happy person, driven by duty, we know, sustained by faith, but made happy by her passions for her dogs and her horses. That's what kept her going. She had interests outside of herself. Same with the Duke of Edinburgh. He had so many interests. Same, actually, with the King, who is a workaholic, has a variety of real passions. I'm afraid television is not one of them. But that's what makes people happy, doing other things that are outside of yourself. And I think the problem for them will be, looking at yourself in the long run, I don't think is a good thing. Duke of Edinburgh really surprised me by being so interested in Jung. I mean, he surprised me a lot. I mean, for example, on his bedside, he had the poetry of T.S. Eliot as bedside reading. This is the Duke of Edinburgh. But he also really knew about Jung. And he said to me, Jung, towards the end of his life, did some research on former patients. And he looked at the ones who were happiest and the ones who were unhappiest. And the happiest ones were people who had interests beyond themselves, in science, in nature, in the world around them. The most unhappy were the people who were introspective, who were brooding about themselves. And that, in a sense, inspired his projects like the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme, the Outward Bound Trust, all of that. And so his line was, there is science behind this. I'm not just saying it, but actually it's true.
That's extremely interesting because Meghan's podcast is called Archetypes. And it's a sort of total sort of lobotomized understanding of Jung. Not that I really understand Jung, but that it's actually every episode is supposed to be about an archetype, but it ends up being Meghan talking about herself again.
Indeed, funny enough, in my book, Elizabeth, this intimate portrait of the Queen, I actually touch on that because I was writing about him and archetypes, and one of the Duke of Edinburgh's friends was telling me how they got excited. There was a big book about archetypes written in the 1970s or 80s, and they were referring to it, and I suddenly thought, oh, actually, this podcast is called Archetypes, so there obviously is a connection, but it seemed to be a loose connection, because something had gone wrong somewhere along the line.
I'm not sure I think she's bright, actually, but I'm not sure she knows what it means.
What is interesting, too, is I do know for a fact that the Queen was very encouraging to Meghan at the beginning, and said to her, which did surprise me, in terms, you're an actress. If you want to go on working as an actress, you must. That is your profession. That is your skill. Do that. But Meghan said, no, I want to work for the Commonwealth. So the Queen was very excited. I want to be part of this and make it work. And the Queen then said, well, maybe as a kind of mentor, Sophie Wessex could help you. And that's when Meghan said, no, I don't think so. Thank you very much. I've got Harry. And I think that's where it began to go, and thinking, maybe it isn't going to work out.
That's why I wanted to ask, obviously, with the Queen, with her long view, has seen many outsiders coming into that family. How was she in terms of sort of welcoming them in, and how did she see that sort of role of, sort of her children and grandchildren marrying other people and coming into the firm?
She was very good about that. She was very blessed herself in that she has made a good marriage when she was young, and knew who she wanted to marry. People think, it's quite amusing, people think that the Queen first met the Duke of Edinburgh in 1939. All the obituaries state that, all the biographies say it was their first encounter. As the Duke of Edinburgh said to me, we were cousins, both great-great-grandchildren of Queen Victoria. We had met before. And the idea that when the Queen was 13 and he was 18, it was a love at first sight, is completely preposterous in his view. But that's the myth. And that's what they want to say, that's what they will say. His line was that they didn't really become close until towards the end of the war. I think the Queen, who certainly took a shine to several other young men, indeed, as I show in my book, quoting letters from her, there was a cousin of hers, rather too close a cousin, who she really admired and thought was a very good marrying prospect. He became a clergyman, and I think they would have got on extremely well. But anyway, there was the Duke of Edinburgh. He was like a god. He was an Adonis, and it worked. But he was royal. So he knew the way it worked. He was a great-great-grandchild of Queen Victoria. So though he was, as it were, from an outside family from Greece, he nonetheless knew the way the system worked. Indeed, he was rather irritated when he was being shown around Windsor Castle, went to stay there before he married the Queen. One of the sort of equerries was showing him his room. He said, I do know my way around here. My mother was born at Windsor Castle. So he was, in a sense, an outsider who was also an insider. But when it came to, for example, her sister marrying Tony Armstrong-Jones, who became Tony Snowdon, and her children marrying outside of royalty, I think she was aware of the problems and was very welcoming. And I know that with Meghan, she wanted to take her, and indeed she did take her, on solo engagements. So you can see how it's done. Come with me. And the first trip they took them on was to my old constituency, the city of Chester. So I thought, this is a very good idea. But it turned out the reason that the Queen chose that, she saw on the programme that she was asked to open a theatre in Chester. So the Queen thought, actress in the family, come with me. And I have to say, everybody who was there, including the Lord Lieutenant who observed it the day, said Meghan was superb. She really delivered the goods. She stood, as it were, one step behind the Queen. The Queen led the way. She'd never been to the north of England before. She said, it's the north of England. She coped with the windy weather, but she was impeccable and charming, and everybody loved her. And so that was a big success.
And there wasn't any kind of sort of residual snobbery about an actress entering the family at all, or anything like that?
None at all. They love showfolk. The Queen, I think, if given another life, the Duke of Edinburgh told me if he'd had his way, he wouldn't have gone to the Navy at all. He could be perverse. I mean, whatever you said, his reply was, yes, but. Whatever it was, yes, but. He always had a contrary view. So you talked about his service in the Royal Navy. He was mentioned as, yes, but. If I'd been given my own hand, I'd have joined the RAF. That's what he said. The Queen, I genuinely think, might have become an actress. Seems an extraordinary thing to say, because she was quite shy as a person.
Of course.
But I think often shy people get freedom when performing. And you remember how brilliant she was only earlier this year in that Paddington Bear sketch. Fantastic. But the Queen, I talked to the Queen about the Second World War. And I said, for you, what's memorable? And I think I prompted her by saying Winston Churchill. And she said, of course, Winston Churchill. And then she said to me, you can research this. I don't know whether it's true. She said, but I think that Winston Churchill is the only person who wasn't a member of the royal family ever to stand in the centre of the balcony at Buckingham Palace. I don't think anybody else in history has ever done so, which is intriguing. We can find that out. Anyway, she then went on to say, for me, I suppose the happiest times were the Christmas pantomimes. I said, oh, really? And for 4 or 5 years, they put on a Christmas show every year at Windsor Castle. She was in the lead with Princess Margaret. It was produced by a headmaster from a local school that not everybody liked. And I said, what part did you play? The principal boy, said the Queen. Doing this, principal boy. And she clearly adored doing it. And she said, when they did Cinderella, I said, who played Buttons? She said, we didn't call him Buttons, we called him something else. And she told me the name of the fellow. And she said, I'm still feeling worried about this. My sister and I, we sent him a telegram on the opening night from 2 secret admirers. That's all we signed it. And we've wondered ever since whether he realised it was us, or whether he's wondering who those 2 secret admirers were. So the Queen was very in sympathy with actors and actresses. Not necessarily playing themselves, playing members of the royal family, but, as a rule.
Freddie, on that trip to America last week, you see them in the Boston Garden, Kate and Wills. How do you think this has all gone down with America? Because obviously you got the Sussexes over in America right now with their claims, and Kate and William over here. How do you think the perception of the royal family in America have changed as someone who's a long-time observer of the scene there?
Well, one insider said to me that they had a Kennedy off. And that William and Kate won, because William and Kate, the Kennedys are sort of American royalty in a disgusting way, and William and Kate met sort of senior Kennedys, the elder Kennedys, whereas Harry and Meghan got this award from RFK's 7th child, and it was a sort of made-up woke gong called Ripple of Hope. So I think Americans are interesting when it comes to the monarchy, because they have a totally different perspective on it. And actually, I think Brits tend to think that Americans take monarchy much more seriously than they do. We think that they're obsessed with it and they're interested in it, and they are interested in it, but they also think it's a great joke. And that's where it comes to Harry and Meghan. I think they are sort of slightly all sniggering about it, because they're sort of seeing how far they'll go down the path towards the Kardashians.
An accidental comedy, as you were saying earlier. This inadvertent comedy, the hilarity of it all.
Two things to say in relation to inadvertent comedy. On Coney Island once, I had an ice cream, this is 40 years ago, that I promise you was called Ripple of Hope.
Oh, really?
It's an ice cream, Coney Island. The other thing that happened, not 40 years ago, 50 years ago, I travelled in a lift with Robert Kennedy.
Oh, really?
By mistake. I didn't see the sign above the lift saying senators only. It was the Senate.
Were you?
I was a student on the tour, you do the tour. And the lift doors opened, I stepped in, there was only one other person in the lift. It was Robert Kennedy. So I thought, this is rather exciting. Mr. Kennedy, how exciting to meet you. The doors were closing as he was pointing to the sign that said senators only. But I had a brief encounter.
Did you get out in time?
Yes, well, I had it was quite exciting. And also, am I allowed to share this with you? My trip with Robert Kennedy was more forthcoming than when I went on another lift trip with Michael Jackson.
Oh, wow.
Now we're name dropping. I got into a lift with Michael Jackson.
Talking about Kings of Pop.
With Michael Jackson and his minders. And it was a service lift. It was in London at the RIBA. He was going to a book launch. His friend Uri Geller, the fellow who bends the spoons, was giving a book launch, and Michael Jackson was going. We were in the service lift together, okay? So there I am, so excited, and probably telling Michael Jackson I once travelled in a lift with Robert Kennedy. Anyway, he doesn't respond. He's there all masked up. Before COVID, he was really ahead of the curve. He was all masked up, wearing a full Michael Jackson kit. He was not very big, with his burly minders. Anyway, he didn't say a word. Got out of the lift, walked away. And I said to his minders, well, that wasn't very friendly. There I was trying to be, gracious and admiring Mr. Jackson. He didn't say a word. And the minder said to me, it's a Monday. Mr. Jackson never speaks on a Monday. It's a good rule in life. My wife says, well, if only you could adopt that rule. Forgive me. Back to your subject in hand.
Not at all. Well, we're just coming to our end, unfortunately, just to feel like we're just
it's beginning. A brilliant magazine,
we should do another whole section on lifts.
But actually, what about
the ups and downs?
The ups and downs.
Look,
I can't believe Tarky's still alive. When eventually, in another 20 years, he drops off the perch, maybe I get a column at the back called Lifts, Ups and Downs. Ups and Downs.
Social climbing, perhaps, cool, comes very easy.
People I met on the way up, I'll meet them again on the way down, which is why it's such fun to see you two boys.
We're probably running over time now, but I've got a good lift story related to the Senate.
Oh, good, Freddy.
So my old boss was she was a Hill reporter, and she was, Joe Biden, who was then the senator for Delaware, walked past, and there was a scrum of people. He was involved in some story, I don't know what it was. And there was a scrum of reporters, and she was the only woman, and she was sort of being bustled about, and Biden got all gallant and said, hey, leave the lady alone, come with me, darling, and brought her into the lift, the Senate lift, and then the door shut, and she thought, great, this is my chance to ask him lots of questions, and he got out a Snickers bar, and apparently inserted the whole Snickers bar into his mouth.
No.
And then just masticated
throughout
the ascent. And that's my live story. So we could do an ups and downs book. Should we do it together?
What is this called? Spectator YouTube?
Spectator TV.
If this is what it's like, I'm going to be tuning in. Are you on every week?
No.
I think we should be on as a double act.
Yeah, no, I like that.
Honestly, a whole Snickers bar. He's got a big mouth, that Biden.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, the things you learn.
Coming on Spectator TV.
Spectator TV. Stay tuned. It's a great channel. I recommend it. I mean, who needs GB News? Now we've got Spectator TV.
Gyles, Freddy, thank you very much for joining me.